Hello there, my name's Card. I've been a progressive activist and anarchist organiser here in Australia for about 7 or so years now, mainly focusing on pragmatically addressing issues of workers' self-interest and access to housing. I prefer to avoid getting bogged down in anything that's too abstract. I think the focus of any political organiser should be on addressing what's tangible and in front of them in the moment, not in some imagined utopian future. That being said, unfortunately, what's right in front of us, here down under at the moment, is something that's a little abstract. Ever since the last federal election brought in a different government, our new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has been floating the idea of instituting a constitutionally recognised Aboriginal Peoples Advisory Board to the federal parliament. What that means, essentially, is running all new prospective legislation past a focus group of Aboriginal people to see what they think of it. We've been calling this hypothetical board of advisors the Indigenous Voice to Parliament, or more simply, just the Voice. New Zealand has had basically the same thing for years now, and Canada has something very similar. But despite what a small change this would be, and the fact that neither of those countries have since fallen into chaos, just about every commentator here on the right has been screaming incoherently about it ever since the idea got brought up. The matter of whether or not a small change like this is A, a good move to make, and B, the best use of everyone's time and resources, has kicked up such a drawn-out debate that now Prime Minister Albanese just more or less wants to have an official referendum on the issue later this year, and will go from there based theoretically on what the majority of the population wants. The only problem with this is now the whole thing's become the newest big culture war argument down here, and in effect, with it looking like we will have a referendum, now everyone has to take a side. Currently asking us to vote yes to the Voice is almost all of Australia's progressive special interest organisations, as well as our entire nominally centre-left incumbent Labour Party, and most of the opposition's centre-right Liberal Party, although the latter has heard some dissent from its membership, and is, on the whole, trying to push the Prime Minister to put some more concrete details about this proposal on the table. The vote no crowd is mostly just the rightward fringes of the Liberal Party, their supporters, assorted reactionary cranks that have been foaming at the mouth since the end of the White Australia policy, and perhaps curiously, a small but impassioned group of progressive leftists of one sort or another, mostly themselves Indigenous, who see endorsing the Voice to Parliament as accepting a small concession from the government when they should be pushing for much more radical change. The unfortunate thing about a binary choice, like this referendum would be, is that there isn't a whole lot of room for nuance or showing your reasoning at the ballot box, when at the end of the day, you're just choosing yes or no. Unlike our last big nationwide yes or no vote, when we decided whether or not to legalise gay marriage, this time we're dealing with something, dare I say, a lot less actually impactful and a lot less clearly understood. I've made the following argument to innumerable fellow lefties the past year, so I figure I might as well get it on record. I certainly don't think The Voice is going to be any big sea change in Australian politics. But since, at the end of the day, my choice is between yes or no, my intent is to vote yes. But, in the run-up to the referendum itself, I won't be spending any considerable time on it. Hopefully, you would know and acknowledge that no capitalist government will ever willingly do anything to undermine its own power, nor do career politicians typically make decisions based on any sort of actual ethical calculus. There is a pragmatic reason that this government, and even its Liberal Party predecessor, bandied around the idea of this Indigenous parliamentary focus group. In this country, over even just the last 5 years, we've seen more and more young adults, people just coming of age and voting and thinking about politics for the first time, begin to walk away from just uncritically turning a blind eye to issues of Indigenous determination. And it's getting pretty easy to see, too. Take, for example, the national holiday, Australia Day on January 26th. It's the anniversary of when the first representatives of the British Crown landed on this continent and subsequently claimed it. More and more young voters are preferring not to celebrate on the day, either treating it as just a generic day off, or increasingly attending Invasion Day rallies on the 26th. That's independent alternative events essentially centered around the idea of protesting the celebration of colonization. The crowds at those have been growing remarkably quickly, and it really looks like we're seeing widespread momentum build behind a mass movement for increased Indigenous sovereignty. A lot of people are genuinely becoming conscious of issues like disproportionate Indigenous incarceration rates, or how mining interests despoil sacred sites, or how the national holiday literally being in remembrance of when a genocide against the Indigenous people of this country started is actually kind of bad. And with all this public momentum building, the government simply has a vested interest in undercutting the emergent campaign for further Indigenous sovereignty. It's not that complicated. The Voice is essentially one part distraction, one part minor concession to the electorate in the hopes that we might accept it and then stop pushing for more meaningful or material change. Both major parties, as well as the likes of Rupert Murdoch's News Corp and this country's fetid mining industry, wouldn't all be waving this voice along with overt approval if it wasn't a strategic move. Any serious leftist ought to be able to look at this situation and see it for what it is immediately, and attempt to release a little bit of steam from behind grassroots activists by throwing us down a tiny and mostly symbolic bone. That analysis alone, though, doesn't completely answer the question, I would point out. All things considered, should we rather the Voice referendum end up favouring the yes or the no crowd? Theoretically speaking, if the no vote wins, literally nothing changes. The law doesn't change, no problems are fixed, and hopefully the left in this country wouldn't be so disheartened it gets set back at all by that sort of result. If the yes vote wins, we get at least a symbolic victory. And I, for one, have enough confidence in the activists and radicals of this continent to think we wouldn't just rest on our laurels after that. Get the voice, by all means, but then keep pushing for more and more. I have to reject the calls of a scant few on the left in this country who are barracking for the referendum to fail. For all the good faith speculation by some that rejecting any sort of electoralist compromise is worth some sort of moral victory here, or that the way through is by hoping for the contradictions to heighten even further, I really don't think either is true here. Nor do I think it's the right time to put that much effort into the campaign against the vote, even just thinking pragmatically. But I think it's also worth at least mentioning that anyone opposing the Voice is, unfortunately now, sharing a side with the absolute ghouls of the reactionary far right, who apparently can't even stand to see even a token concession made to Australia's First Nations peoples. As we get closer to the day of the referendum itself, we can expect that more than a few individuals with fascistic sympathies are going to try and make culture war hay out of the matter. And I'd greatly prefer to avoid even appearing to share a political position with those people, or give them a symbolic victory at the ballot box either. Just because the Indigenous voice to Parliament really isn't what any hardcore lefty would have asked for, there's no shame in voting yes. And ideally, taking the W once the results are tabulated and not letting up the fight for a single second afterwards. If we need to vote on this, I'll vote yes. Granted, it's a pretty qualified yes, but no matter how big of an asterisk is amended on my vote, it's still a yes. I hope that bit of thinking out loud might just help you if you and yours have been discussing this as of late. Please feel free to share this around and subscribe if you'd like to hear more from me in the future. Once again, my name's Card. Bye for now, and have a lovely day.